So earlier this week, there was pretty big news that came from 4chan involving an internal Game Boy and Game Boy Advance emulator, fueling speculation that Nintendo was preparing to announce and launch Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and GBA for the Nintendo Switch Online service. And in today's episode, I want to talk more about the Game Boy Advance emulator known as Sloop, because initially I had some concerns about the legitimacy of this, whether it was actually a true Nintendo internally developed emulator or some elaborate hoax that was made by someone with knowledge of basically wrapping a user interface or a front end on an existing emulator and pretending that it's a leaked emulator internally. But as we'll see, I uncovered more information over time that really does lead me to believe that this is the real deal. Today's video is brought to you by Surfshark VPN. With internet privacy being such a huge deal these days, it's more important now than ever to protect yourself. With Surfshark VPN, you can easily hide your IP address and encrypt all data that you send and receive. You can easily switch regions to other countries in the world. This means not only your true IP address and identity is masked, it also means you can get around any annoying geolocation locked video content. You know, the ones that say, this video isn't supported in your country? This can get annoying for me when I want to watch local Aussie news. With Surfshark VPN, I can switch my country to Australia and this problem simply goes away. When I'm researching my videos, because of the nature of my channel, sometimes I need to access older unsecured websites of modding and the underground, and I feel safer knowing that my true IP address is not exposed to these sites. Surfshark VPN also allows you to connect to unlimited devices simultaneously on a single account, and this includes Windows devices, Linux, Android, iOS, Amazon Fire TV, and much more. Surfshark VPN has an awesome offer on right now. If you sign up at surfshark.deal/MVG, you will save 83% off and receive 3 extra months for free. And if you think it sucks, there's a 30-day money-back guarantee, which will give you plenty of time to try out Surfshark VPN risk-free. And to quickly recap, on Tuesday, an internal developed Game Boy Advance emulator known as Sloop had leaked, supposedly taken from an old Nintendo Switch dev kit and leaked on 4chan. The emulator itself came bundled with 35 different ROMs, and is said to be fully working, but contained some bugs. Now, full disclaimer, all the screenshots that I'm showing here are from Twitter and various other sources. This list is interesting because it contains many titles that are considered fan favorites. And with this leak, some believe that it may give us some insight to what Nintendo might be planning for the Nintendo Switch Online service. The leak also contains a Game Boy emulator codenamed Hyoko. Game Boy emulation is heavily rumored to arrive on the Nintendo Switch Online service at some point. Now, I couldn't say when, but I would say at the very least, this does confirm that Nintendo has built and is at least testing Game Boy emulation. In preparation for NSO, it does seem likely, but as to when we will see it, it's very hard to say. But I want to focus today's episode on the GBA emulator known as Sloop. Based on these screenshots, it appears to be a mostly work-in-progress development effort with a pretty basic user interface. The user scrolls through a list of pre-installed ROMs and selects the one to play. By all accounts, the emulation itself is said to be quite accurate and performs very well. We expect this, of course, but GBA emulation has many edge cases where some community-based emulators may not fare as well. Now, when I saw the screenshots online, I was pretty excited. I personally felt like GBA was not a part of Nintendo's plans for the NSO, and this does make me second guess myself. However, there is one particular image that made me question if indeed this emulator was developed by Nintendo at all and not a homebrew release with a different front end. This device here is known as an Easy Flash. It's a device that allows you to install thousands of ROMs on and play, very much in the same way as an EverDrive cartridge. Nintendo's stance on ROMs and flash cartridges are very well documented, and they are vehemently against them. They label them as piracy devices, and in some instances have taken flash card makers to court to block the sale of them. So why would an Easy Flash ever be mentioned in an internal Nintendo-developed emulator? And to add more fuel to the fire, on Nintendo's website, if we look at their legal information, they clearly state, game copiers circumvent the technological protection measures in Nintendo products and enable the user to make, play, and distribute illegal copies of Nintendo video games which infringe Nintendo's intellectual property. These devices allow for the uploading or downloading of Nintendo game data or so-called read-only memory ROMs to and from the internet. Then they specifically mention the Easy Flash as part of the list of game copiers. With all this in mind, based on the image of the Easy Flash cartridge on Sloop, it gave me pause that this emulator may just be a front end for a homebrew release or an elaborate hoax, but many respected people in the community believe that it's legitimate, so I decided to take a bit of time to do some digging to see. If it was legitimate, then it would not only show Nintendo's double standard, but it would also be incredibly embarrassing for them. And if it's fake, well, it's a 4chan leak, so we've kind of come to expect that. Other areas of the application that seemed a little suspect to me was the UI itself. It's very apparent that the UI being used is an open source tool known as ImGUI. ImGUI is used by many developers and teams for many different things, as it's very easy to set up and use pretty much everywhere. It's not restricted to homebrew, of course. Commercial games also use ImGUI, but the choice to use ImGUI is certainly interesting. Nintendo has their own internal UI tools that are a part of the SDK. However, this emulator seems like it may have been developed on a PC and then ported over to the Switch later. Then there's also the inclusion of homebrew test ROMs, such as the 240p test suite. This is a port of Artemio's 240p test suite to the GBA that was developed by user Pinobatch back in 2018. As for the software itself, it's a suite for video game consoles to help in the evaluation of upscalers, upscaling, line doublers, and of course TV processing. This would be a valuable tool in the development of any emulator for the Nintendo Switch. But introducing community open source tools and the Easy Flash made everything just feel off to me. Based on these things alone, I was definitely beginning to question the legitimacy of this emulator as a Nintendo developed tool. Another argument is that the emulator came from a dev kit and it was signed for dev kits, so there was no way it was a homebrew effort. This is true, of course, but it's also not proof that this is a Nintendo developed tool. Someone with a dev kit can still make a side project that never gets released. However, in recent days, a few discoveries has led me to change my mind on this emulator, and I do now believe that this was an internally developed emulator by Nintendo Europe R&D division known as NERD. The smoking gun, if you will, is what's known as the commit history. One crucial part of this leak that came bundled with the game is the commit history. This contains a running list of all changes that were done to the emulation's code, when the changes were made and by whom. While a git commit log could be faked, if it was to be faked, it would have just been easier to remove this folder before leaking it out. So what do the logs actually tell us? Well, the emulator was updated in 2020, and of course we have no visibility as to what has progressed since then. But it indeed shows us that the users that were committing code to Sloop were indeed NERD employees. The emulator itself has also been reverse engineered, and there is no trace of a community-based emulator such as MGBA or VBA. Again, something that would be fairly difficult to conceal. And with these two pieces, I do believe that this work was internally developed at Nintendo. At least, all the signs point to that. As for the Easy Flash, I can only assume that this was internal work that NERD was developing that would never get beyond their studio. Sloop, to me, feels like more of a test suite that was never meant to be anything that they were ever going to send to Nintendo for approval or input. This very much feels like an internal project to only select tested GBA games to determine how good the emulation performed. Each of the games in this suite is used to test emulation. For example, timings, transparency effects, graphics, sound, and input. There are sections devoted specifically for testing certain parts of the game. So in conclusion, yes, I do believe that Sloop was developed by Nintendo, or should I say, NERD, and it's incredibly embarrassing for Nintendo that this leak has gotten out. But I also have to wonder, how is Nintendo feeling about all this? Maybe with a leak this size, that maybe they're second guessing or questioning whether they really want to actually release Game Boy Advance to the Nintendo Switch Online service now, knowing that this leak has already come out into the wild. But they are just my thoughts and speculations. But let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. I'll be checking them out after this video goes live. Once again, guys, thank you so much for watching. If you liked this episode, don't forget to put a like on it, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Bye for now.